In 2018, Xbox and Microsoft acquired Obsidian Entertainment, and according to the studio head at the time, he originally went in to pitch Avowed to Xbox, which led to Xbox purchasing Obsidian Entertainment. In an article with Gaming Bolt in 2019, the Obsidian CEO said that the decision to be acquired was in no small part to allow them to continue to make these big RPGs. Here we are in 2025 with the first of these big RPGs about to release in Avowed, and a second one coming later this year. I've been a big fan of Obsidian since the Knights of the Old Republic days. Fallout New Vegas is one of my favorite games of all time. I've played South Park, Stick of Truth, Tyranny, Pillars of Eternity 1 and Deadfire, The Outer Worlds, Grounded, and now I've finished Avowed, and after 40 hours, I'm left with a sense of disappointment. Disappointment in the seemingly small scope of the game, for sure, but primarily in the game's almost intentional lack of risk-taking. Let me know any questions you have about the game in the comments down below and I'll get back to you. And I do want to prefix this after the intro in saying that I didn't hate Avowed. It's not a bad game at all. It's completely fine, but there's just a lot of baffling decisions here that we'll get into. Now, I will briefly start with performance before getting into the good stuff. Now, I played Avowed on my RTX 4090 machine. I hit a pretty consistent 60 frames with a few dips in the later regions of the game with all the settings maxed. However, the game does have ray tracing, except it's simply like a toggle. So exactly what that's toggling on, I have no idea. Someone smarter than me can figure that out. I also think that there is something weird happening with the super sampling and the NVIDIA frame gen tech, as turning on NVIDIA frame gen doesn't affect my frame rate at all, and NVIDIA DLSS doesn't seem to correctly adjust based on my settings. Even when you turn it off and restart the game, it doesn't actually seem to do anything. So I'm not exactly sure there. I also experienced several hard crashes where I lost 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay. I also know that there are other reviewers that experience these crashes, and Obsidian are aware of it, so hopefully it's something they fix before launch. And I did also have a few bugs. A couple of quests that I just could not complete because it wouldn't allow me to talk to the person to hand it in or move to the next step. Fell through the world a couple of times and a few other things as well. Now, if you are playing on console, the Xbox Series S does have both a quality and balanced mode. The quality mode targeting 30 frames that does support ray tracing, and then the balanced mode is a 1080p 40 FPS mode that has an unlocked frame rate. Then the Xbox Series X has a quality, a balanced, and a performance mode, with the quality being 4K at 30 and the performance mode being 180p at 60 frames with an unlocked frame rate that doesn't support ray tracing. So your mileage may vary if you are playing on console. Obviously check out a review that is playing on console. Typically in a review, I would start with the world and talking about the quest design, but I really think it's important to start with the story here, as it is the crux of what this game is. You as the player arrive in the Living Lands, a previously unexplored region of Iora in the Pillars of Eternity games, as an envoy to the Empire, with a primary mission to stop the Dream Scourge. But there's a catch: you're also a godlike, a special being of creation that serves a god patron. You don't know who that god is, however. During the character creator, you will choose your godlike features, but you can hide these during the character creation process if you do prefer. Now, there's not an overwhelming amount of options in the character creator here. It's pretty stock standard. There is this weird thing where the lighting is not consistent across your character's face, and it's weirdly dark on one side, so it does make it exactly difficult to get those exact colors and everything that you want for the look. You'll also pick a background which can define your starting attributes and your weapon, but you'll replace these almost immediately and you can just reset your attributes. What this mainly does though is give you some background options to choose in dialogue. Now, this is mostly flavor text. That is just a way to keep the conversation going while allowing you to express those roleplay elements for your background. And I do appreciate that this does exist. Now, in the early game, basically everyone hates you because you're a godlike and you also work for the Empire. Basically, it's the only two character traits that you have, and you've chosen neither of them yourself. And unfortunately, that's kind of all the story has going for itself. You're a godlike and you arrive from the Empire along with the Steel Garrote to try and put an end to this Dream Scourge that's happening. And in each of the 4 regions across the game's runtime, these elements are the only core elements of the plot. Everything revolves around this. which at a certain point just becomes tedious as it's all you're ever going to hear about. But look, like the Dream Scourge is seemingly a world-ending plague, so of course everyone is going to be worried about it, but in all 4 regions, you essentially complete the same story arc of searching for clues about what the Dream Scourge is and where it's coming from, whilst getting tidbits of information about your godlike past. And then that next clue will be in the next region, so you'll move on to that next region. Now, all the settlements and the people have nothing else going on. Part of what made the Outer Worlds so good to me was, yes, it has a very similar structure here, but in each of the regions, or planets in that case, had their own problems going on. You could choose to stay in those regions and help them and resolve their local issue that had some legit choice and consequence and decision making. And then you'd resolve that main story beat and move on to the next area. There isn't any multi-step side quests or branching stories here, simply the main quest that pulls you through the game's regions. There is some legitimate choice and consequence at the end of the game's narrative based on decisions you made at the end of the main story beat in each of the regions, where characters will play back those choices you made, and then you will make a final choice to determine the outcome of the game. But I seriously lacked interest in any of the regions or their main story choices because the game didn't make me care about the characters that were in these regions and the people, right? We'll get into this more in the next block, but because there's never enough time that you spend with these characters, there just is no care about what they have going on, because also they don't have anything going on beyond the Dream Scourge. This is further accentuated by the fact that you are a part of the Adirian Empire, having never been to the Adirian Empire or met the Emperor himself. That the opening cinematic does tell you that you have met the Emperor and you've done this and that you're coming here on behalf of him, but you as the player, you don't have any of that context. You've never met this person. You have no reason to believe in what the Emperor's vision for the Living Lands can be, because they haven't shown you why you should believe in the Emperor's vision, or really any way to connect with that initial starting point of you being a part of the Empire. They told you that you have, but they haven't shown you anything. This is also heavily reflected in the game's very fantastical dialogue.
Look at the Siege of Craghold. And that was just so that Lengrath could try and show up Council Hot.
Wise words.
This is a conversation that I'm having towards the back end of the game. Now, honestly, I had no idea what they said. Now, I do appreciate that Avowed has the option to expand the dialogue out and you can read little descriptions of all those fantasy words, but I feel that this is essentially a crutch, because what it allows the writers to do here is refuse to explain anything to you in the dialogue and just assume that you know what all of these gods and characters and other creations and words mean, and then expect you to expand out those options and then like read the little blurb description that they have. And it makes it extremely hard to connect with the characters and your character and the world and the story that it's trying to present you, because it refuses to invite you into its world and allow you to really experience it. It just spits exposition at you with a lot of big words and says, keep up guys, come on, we've got to keep moving. If you're a diehard Pillars fan and understand all the lore, I'm sure it will make complete sense to you, and you can kind of get away with that stuff in a CRPG that's much more of a hardcore experience. But this is much more of a casual single player open zone RPG that you would expect a lot more people to pick up on Game Pass. And I just think that these elements are going to turn a lot of people off before they've even gotten to some of the more good stuff in this game.
Anyway, if this place can't give us misfits and screw-ups a second chance, what hope do we have?
Leaning into these open areas rather than a true open world has allowed Obsidian to create these beautiful vistas and tighter areas with great exploration potential and always something to look at. I also love the use of color in the world, like the oversaturated color on the fauna and flora that glow at night as well. It's just this really unique atmosphere and design that we haven't really seen in a game like this, and I really did dig this. However, it is odd that when you're exploring at night or in a dark tunnel, there is no torch or lantern option. You essentially just have to rely on like the glowing elements around you. Now, this does make each scene look incredibly unique and beautiful in its own way, but I would still have liked the option to like light my way in some way. Aside from its beauty, Avowed's 4 explorable regions are populated with enemies to fight, chests to find, a couple of treasure maps, bounties to collect, and a fair few side quests.
That's good.
These all on the surface sound like the right stuff for an RPG like this. However, what I slowly begun to realize across my 40 hours I've spent with with Avowed is how surface level all of these elements and a lot of the elements of Avowed actually are.
That's bad.
So the enemies in the world, they don't move around or patrol or exist in the world beyond standing in that exact spawn point waiting for you to kill them. In some instances, enemies will just simply spawn in front of you as well, so you've got more to defeat. Now, the combat here is fantastic, more on that in a bit, so I didn't overly mind, but as you end up sprinting around the world, you're just cannonballing yourself at each encounter, smashing through these enemies, and then moving on. Each region also has a settlement that's populated with locals. This is where you'll pick up like all of your side quests and sell some useless gear, and that's kind of about it, right? Like the other NPCs and citizens of all the towns just simply stand around. They don't talk to each other or try to create a sense of a living community. Sometimes you can see an NPC walk like 5 feet with this very low frame rate animation, and it's almost shocking just to see the movement, like see someone move. The one time that the game actually has you follow an NPC, it's so awful.
Patience, darling. I'll meet you at the tavern. Patience, darling. I'll meet you at the tavern.
Oh, hurry up. I'm a busy man.
Patience, darling.
Today, Junior?
I'll meet you. Patience, darling. I'll meet you at the tavern. Yoo-hoo! Over here, dearie.
There isn't a huge attempt here to make NPCs seem believable or interactive with the player or themselves beyond giving you a quest and the vendors. While there is a day and night cycle for the sun, the NPCs will never move from their like specific location. You can't attack them, you can't talk to them or anything. You can, however, steal anything and everything from every house, which is the first thing you'll do when you get to towns. Honestly, you'll just run around and steal everyone's stuff and loot everything you possibly can, which just feels odd in an RPG that there is no interaction for these behaviors. I do firmly think that just having played 120 hours of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, that I am acutely aware of NPC behavior and reactivity in the world, but it does just leave a very lifeless feeling to this world that there is none of this. And this isn't just in towns. In the open zones, there are no random encounters, there are no movement or life to anything with the enemies or NPCs or anything. You will occasionally run across someone that you can just have a conversation with, but they're simply just standing there waiting for you to interact with them, and that's it. Even if they are interactable, in some cases they're completely not either. It's elements like this and the game's incessant need to put chess literally everywhere that you begin to realize how static this world actually is. And the gameplay structure actually reminds me a lot of like an MMO. Quite often whilst playing Avowed, I was actually thinking about Elder Scrolls Online, like the smaller open zones you can explore, you know, the static enemy placement that like stay in their areas, even the quest design. Like most quests will send you to a place in that zone, you'll kill some enemies, you'll pick up a MacGuffin, and then you'll go back and talk to the quest giver. And here you're essentially given like two options. You can do A or you can do B, and this will just resolve that side quest. You'll get your reward and then you'll continue on your journey. If you've played ESO, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. They have a very similar quest structure to show a semblance of choice without actually having any real consequences. And this is fine. Like, I actually really like ESO. A lot of people do. And I don't think that this is one of the major problems with Avowed. It's just that I kind of expected more from a large AAA RPG, from a premier developer, now with a Microsoft budget behind them. But it seems like that's mostly gone into combat.
Let's finish.
Take your best shot.
Man, I just loved the combat here. The combat is so flexible in how you choose to engage with it. Other than the two-handed melee weapons, a bow or a rifle, you can dual wield everything. Swords, maces, spears, shields, wands, and grimoires. I know it's kind of a departure to the more class-based CRPG structure of the Pillars of Eternity games, but what Obsidian has done here is create probably the best, most visceral feeling first-person RPG combat system. This is like exactly what I would like Elder Scrolls 6 to feel like. I'm especially impressed by the magic system and the hit feedback of melee weapons. You can ragdoll enemies with like big melee weapon hits, and every hit has like a feeling of impact, and it just feels so good. Spells also sound great. They have great feedback when you're using them, plus the elemental effects you can apply on enemies to burn them, freeze them, electrocute them, bleed them, all these different effects. Plus then you've got the wands, which you can then like essentially just shoot free magic at enemies, and then you can wield spells in your offhand with the grimoire, also giving you access to spells that maybe you haven't unlocked yet, but if you have unlocked them, you can cast higher versions of that spells that add additional effects. This all coalesces into a really free-flowing combat system that you can try any sort of weapon you pick up, if it's a unique or whatever, but also allowing the freedom to tackle those combat encounters how you like. This is further enhanced by the smart enemy design. You've got these like big tank brutes that will block, that you'll need to like either power attack them or do something to like prevent that block. You've got priests who will heal their allies, so obviously you want to target these first. You've got archers who'll sit back in the distance, and then the general trash that, you know, you can farm. Doesn't that also sound like an MMO, to be honest? What this allows for is when you enter a combat situation, you quickly determine the biggest threats, typically the healer, and then you take them out, and then you deal with the trash and like whatever else your plan is from there. It gives most encounters a very unique feeling and keeps it fresh, along with how freely you can switch weapons and try new things. You might find like a brand new unique weapon, like the look of it, and just equip it, try it out. And I really like this freedom, because then you can reset your skills and your attributes if you decide to like go in that route of that new unique that you've picked up. You can also do all of this in third person, however, but it's pretty clear that this wasn't designed to be played in third person. It kind of just feels like a heavily modded Skyrim, as you can really see how floaty some of these animations are in third person, which can be a little weirdly jarring considering how visceral the combat feels in first person. There are plenty of bosses that you'll fight as well, either from bounties that you'll pick up in each town or through the main quest. These are essentially just like higher HP or bigger normal enemies without any unique mechanics. There are only a couple of boss fights that actually have unique mechanics, which is a little disappointing considering how much I enjoyed engaging in this game's combat. I would have also like loved a arena style combat area where you can just fight waves of enemies over and over again as a way to like test builds and weapons and really delve into this excellent combat system and combat loop. There is no way to test builds other than like running around the world and trying to find a pack of enemies just standing around that you haven't already defeated, because the build variety here is fantastic, and I did really enjoy parts of the progression as well, which is also quite strong. So I love and I hate the progression system in Avowed. So you'll level up by gaining experience by defeating enemies or completing quests. Pretty standard stuff here. You'll get a skill point to spend in the warrior, the ranger, or the wizard line. The warrior is focused on those heavy two-handed weapons along with HP and stamina. The ranger's your one-handed weapons, your bows and your pistols. And the wizard is probably, you guessed it, the spells and the wands. You've also got your godlike powers that'll unlock through the story, plus companion skills, but we'll cover that in the companion block. So this stuff is pretty, you know, stock standard, typical stuff, and I just wish the game let you level up faster. Like after doing all of the side quests in the first 3 regions, I was only like level 24 and barely able to delve deep into this skill tree, especially when you consider how many spells there are. There is a lot of hard choices you're going to make with the skills you pick up, and I would have liked more so I could really feel overpowered and create like a unique build earlier in the game. I feel like your build is kind of just coming together as the game is like finishing. You also gain an attribute point when you level up, which you can spend on any of these attributes. Now these will also appear in dialogue options sometimes, along with the background choice, which I did also like. Now typically in RPGs, you will base your skill selection around like a weapon or a few weapons that you really like, that'll sort of become the focus of your build. The problem I have with weapons, and generally with pickups and chests in this game, is that there is so much crap. There is pointless and needless fodder everywhere. Avowed will throw unique gear at you constantly. Every quest, most areas of interest, etc. will have a unique, sometimes multiple. Now, having so many uniques in the game does 2 things. Number 1, it completely devalues standard gear, which you'll be picking up constantly. It is everywhere. There is common and fine, etc., like non-unique gear everywhere in the game, and you'll pick it up because you need to break it down for the materials so you can upgrade those unique pieces. However, you can't just break it down when you look at it. Even though with food you can like hold the button to consume, can't do that with breaking things down. You have to individually pick up every item and then individually, because you can't multi-select in the menu screen, break it down. Number two, actually, before we go number twos, I got a bone to pick about the inventory system. So inventory management and weight makes no sense here. Only weapons and your chest piece have weight. Food, rings, amulets, trinkets, gloves, boots, quest items, etc. have no weight. So to compensate but still satisfy the apparent need for an RPG to have an inventory management system, they've just made armor and weapons weigh an absolute ton. So every now and again when you come across these areas where there's like 5 weapons sitting on the ground, you'll pick all of them up and you'll be like, ah shit, I'm over encumbered again. Let me just open up the menu and manually break down all of this common gear that I've been picking up. But oh, hang on a sec, you have to do it individually. But you could just say, hey look, just leave it, man. Like you don't need that stuff. But you do, because you need those materials specifically to upgrade those weapons to the next tier, which we'll get into in a little bit as to why that is desperately important. Like you have to do this. Okay, number two, having such a large amount of uniques means that a fair chunk of the uniques you find have completely no value and aren't even that unique. I found a ton of uniques that are simply just increasing a stat by 1, or later in the game you'll find another variant of that increases that stat by 2. I've also found several pairs of boots, for example, that increase my dodge distance, my move speed, or my carry capacity, each by a different amount. There becomes a point where you're designing too many uniques and they just become aimless and not additive to the build diversity and the player expression. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't quality uniques here. There absolutely are some really cool uniques, especially in the weapons that you will find. But what really grinds my gears about this progression system is actually the tiered loot system. So all the weapons and the armor has a tier level from common, fine, exceptional, superb, and then legendary. Only uniques can be legendary, by the way, further forcing you to only use uniques. Now, all the gear we mentioned earlier and literally every chest you find in the game is simply a way for you to get materials, so you can then use that as currency to increase the stats of that gear, and once you've increased it by 3, you will then be able to increase it to that next tier. Furthermore, enemies have the same tier system. So when you reach a new region, say for example, when you're in the first region, the enemies are tier 1. When you're in the second region, they're tier 2. Third, they're tier 3. And then the final region, you guessed it, you're immediately fighting enemies that are a higher tier than you. So your weapons aren't as effective, because when you're in, say, region 2 with tier 2 loot, you're only finding those tier 2 materials. And then you go into region 3, enemies are now tier 3, while you are still stuck on tier 2 because you haven't got those crafting materials yet to upgrade yourself. So your weapons will be less effective. They actually have like a unique bounce off animation, so they'll break up your combos. Your armor is like borderline useless as well, and your companions will constantly remind you of this, especially on the higher difficulties. Like I actually started playing this on hard and I ended up dropping the difficulty down specifically because of this, because you have to beat these enemies in order to find enough of those materials so that you can upgrade yourself to that level, which does boil the combat system down to almost a grind for these materials so you can upgrade yourself and actually be effective against these enemies. The game is also very stingy with handing out these resources even when you're breaking down all this gear and doing all the stuff I mentioned earlier. So you can only really upgrade like your main equipment, further devaluing all those cool uniques we were talking about, because you won't have enough crafting resources to bring them up to the next tiers if you want to actually develop them along with your main kit. It all just feels very formulaic in its 4 region world structure, also the 4 tiers of loot plus the 5th legendary, and then the 4 companions available throughout the story.
By the way, now that we've gotten to know each other, let me know if you want to train together.
The assassin, and you're still alive, which means well done, Marius.
For the first time, I don't have to prove myself to anyone.
Oh, lovely to hear that. Not only am I in an Adiran camp, I'm in a cheap Adiran camp.
Now, across your journey, as with all good companion-based RPGs, you'll pick up companions to join you along your quest. Now, typically, I wouldn't like to tell you exactly how many companions are, as I feel like that's kind of a spoiler, but The thing is here is that there is only just the core 4. There are no other ones. You will always have 2 of these 4 companions with you. Now, these companions will also have companion abilities similar to in Dragon Age the Valguard, how they have abilities. But the benefit here is that you can actually cast these abilities yourself as well. So they're essentially just like fire, ice, or electricity to like open something or burn some roots or like activate a device. Except for the 4th one, which is unique to Yatsli. So once you get her, you essentially want to have her in your party all the time, even if you don't like her vibe, because you will need her to remove the magical illusions that you might actually find out in the world. Now with these companions, you will be able to choose from 3 active skills and 1 passive that you can cast yourself or that they will cast themselves in combat as well. However, in terms of like their loadout, like their weapon usage, armor, anything, you can't change any of that, except there are skins, except as far as I know, there are only those 2 sets of bonus skins that you get with the premium edition for your companions. One of those is simply a reskin of their default outfits. I didn't find any other skins for the companions, even when I completed Kai's companion quest, which isn't really a companion quest, which again is fine. It's just a little disappointing. Also, the decision to only have 4 companions is an interesting one as well. Now having such a small companion cast of just simply this 4 means you need to do something special with such a core cast, and you really need to go deep with them and making them stand out. And it also limits your availability or potential of having one of these companions really sync with the community and like the wider, broader RPG audience. Now I want to do a little exercise with you guys, okay? I'm going to name some RPGs and I want you to think about a companion from that game that stands out to you. Mass Effect 2, probably Garrus. Kai uses the same voice actor as Garrus, which is probably why I like him so much. Fallout New Vegas, The Outer Worlds, Baldur's Gate 3. Now, that's quite a broad depth of games, but using The Outer Worlds as an example, right? I remember Pavati vividly, right? I remember her character and her companion arc. You go on this beautiful journey with her and like self-discovery. Now, The Outer Worlds had 6 companions, like 2 isn't significantly more than 4, but when you've only got 4 companions, it means you've only got 4 chances to vibe with someone. But you have to have 2 companions with you at all times here. So really, you need to vibe with 50% of the companion cast. Me personally did not like the Marius guy whatsoever. He was just the most irritating person to me. Could not stand him whatsoever. There's this moment early in the story where he's like, oh, I might like leave and go back to Paradise. And you're given 4 dialogue options to say, no, stay with me. Not a single one to tell him to leave me the hell alone, because you are forced to take these 4 companions with you on your journey. In terms of their overall depth and character development, Kai is definitely the most developed and actually enjoyed his companion story, which by the way, there isn't really a lot of companion stories here. I never got one for Giada or Yatsli. I'm not sure if they do exist. Marius did give me one, but I was like, nah fam, I'm not touching you. And Kai did have a story, but the companion story here was really just to pick up 2 items and go to a specific location. It's not a very in-depth journey that you'll go on for Kai's companion story. It's also a little perplexing how little interaction there is between these companions themselves. When you're out exploring in the world, they will talk to you, the envoy, but they won't talk to each other. There's none of that ambient dialogue that you could typically expect where, you know, they're communicating with each other. There is a little bit of that back at the camp. When you're just chilling at the camp, they will talk to each other, or you might have a conversation with one companion, another companion will chime in, and they will also chime in dialogue, especially throughout the main story. They'll like give their opinion, and so will the voice in your head, which is the god that you serve that is unknown at the start of the game. They will regularly communicate with you and interrupt dialogue and just say stuff in your head. They will also do this every single time that you leave the camp, and these dialogue, you can't just be like, shut up and leave me alone. And that is really annoying, because the only way that you can upgrade your gear or add elements to your unique or talk to your companions, anything like that, you have to go to the camp. So regularly you will just go to the camp to say, upgrade your gear, check your stash, talk to a companion, etc. And then you have to like sleep for the next day. When you sleep, the voice will chime in and just say something, and you can't just like X out of that, or it's just too much. Like, it's too many people interrupting and just forcing you to talk to this voice in your head, which at a certain point I just kind of stopped going to camp unless I had to, because I just didn't want to have to deal with these constant interruptions by the voice talking to
Right.
me.
You know, present company excluded, and all that.
Don't take it personally. Marius only does this with people he likes.
I'd say something back at you, but I'm just not feeling it for some reason.
If this is the first of my reviews you've come across, I will say that I'm typically a pretty positive reviewer. I just like to have fun. And if a game can give me fun, I'm usually pretty lenient with my criticism because that's why we do this, right? We're playing games to have fun, and I just never want that to be lost in all of game criticism and comments. And I did have fun with the combat system in Avowed specifically. Exploring the world was also relatively enjoyable, but mostly the fun I had here was in the combat system. But it does bring me no pleasure to tell you that Avowed is a game that you really should just play on Game Pass or on a deep sale. The formulaic design found in its systems, its very repetitive structure and storytelling and role-playing capabilities make this simply a fine game to play when you've got nothing else to play. I also just simply can't recommend that you buy Avowed outright. February is an incredibly busy month for video games. Avowed here in Australia, just the standard edition, will cost you 120 Australian dollars or 140 if you want to get those premium skins that you can get for your companions. Comparatively, Kingdom Come Deliverance, a 120 plus hour RPG that I absolutely loved, but granted may not be your thing, will only set you back 90 Australian dollars. Monster Hunter Wilds, which comes out very soon, will only set you back $105. All of these are Steam prices in Australia, by the way. That price tag alone for such a cookie cutter RPG experience with very few things that actually stand out, I cannot recommend that you buy Avowed outright. If you have Game Pass and you're just looking for something fun to run around in and do some combat, do a little bit of story decisions, you could definitely pick up Avowed and play it on Game Pass or on a deep sale, and you will have a relatively good time. And these elements that I have mentioned in this video that I didn't personally like, you may actually like, and I'm sure there are other reviewers out there that you should obviously check as well that may have actually vibed with these systems a lot more than I did. But ultimately, to me, I think I was just expecting more from Avowed, at least something unique here, maybe a larger world space to explore from these 4 regions, maybe more than 4 companions, maybe more happening in its world and its decisions that I'm making throughout this story. And it just leaves me disappointed because I love a lot of Obsidian's games, and it feels like to me maybe Obsidian has clearly spread their resources too thin, and we're getting another single player RPG coming later this year from Obsidian in The Outer Worlds 2, which I love The Outer Worlds 1. Like, I'm still excited for it, but I'm worried we're just going to get another cookie cutter single player RPG that isn't doing anything special. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.